The figure in the barn didn't move, didn't breathe, just stood there in the faint glow spilling from the doorway. My jacket on its shoulders, my boots on its feet, my knife dangling loosely from its right hand, the pale fog curling low around, its legs like smoke, and I froze on the back porch, my chest tight, every instinct screaming to get back inside. But something stronger than fear kept me rooted there, a strange, magnetic pull. And then it smiled faintly, the kind of smile that wasn't human, too slow, stretching too wide, and it whispered across the yard in my exact voice, perfectly pitched, almost ready. My breath caught sharp in my throat and I stumbled backward, slamming the kitchen door shut and throwing the locks into place, my entire body shaking as I pressed my back against the counter, gripping the knife so tight my knuckles burned, the silence inside the farmhouse pressing down on me until my ears rang. That's when the security monitor in the living room clicked on by itself again. A faint hum filling the air even though the power had been cut earlier, the grainy black and white feed shifting between camera angles, flickering fast until it stopped on a view I didn't recognize. A dark metal door embedded into the ground somewhere near the back silo, half hidden under frost and weeds, marked faintly with stenciled letters. Node S4. My stomach dropped instantly because Grady had never mentioned anything about a node. And before I could even process it, the monitor glitched violently, static tearing across the screen, and then it froze again, this time showing the interior of something underground. A narrow steel hallway lit by a single flickering bulb. Walls, damp with condensation, and in the far distance, at the very edge of the camera's reach, a shape stood perfectly still, watching the lens from the darkness, its eyes catching the light. Twin pale glints that reflected just like glass. I backed away from the screen instinctively, whispering under my breath, "No, no, no, no." But then came the sound of my phone vibrating violently on the counter, the sudden noise cutting through the silence like a blade. I snatched it, up with shaking hands, answering before I thought, and Grady's voice came through immediately, hoarse and breathless. "Ethan, listen to me. Don't go near the barn, don't go near the silo, do you understand? You need to stay inside the house." My voice cracked, panic spilling out. "Grady, what's going on? What's Node S4? There was silence for a long moment, broken only by his ragged breathing, and then he said it, low and strained, like the words themselves hurt. "They're not from here, Ethan. We built something under this land to contain them. Node S4 is where it started, but it failed. You were never supposed to see it." My knees went weak, bile rising in my throat, my voice barely a whisper. You knew?" And Grady shouted suddenly, raw and panicked. "Stay inside the damn house. If they get you outside the boundary, it's over." But before I could reply, the line cut dead. A hollow click leaving me alone in the silence again. My heart slammed against my ribs as I stared at the locked kitchen door, every instinct screaming to barricade myself deeper inside. But something in me snapped when I glanced at the monitor one last time. The figure inside that underground hallway had moved closer, just a few feet from the camera now, its pale face half visible in the flickering light, and it was smiling. I grabbed the flashlight, my boots, and shoved the knife into my jacket pocket, stepping out into the freezing air despite every part of me begging not to, the fog swallowing the yard in pale silver as I made my way toward the silo. Each crunch, a frost beneath my boots sounding deafening in the stillness. The burned dirt circle came into view on my left, faintly glowing again, and I forced myself to look away, focusing on the silo ahead, its rusted frame looming like a sentinel against the endless white haze. When I reached it, I circled around the base, brushing frost and dead leaves aside until my fingers found the edge of the metal door embedded in the ground, the letters Node S4 etched faintly into the steel, and I hesitated only a moment before, yanking hard on the handle, the rusted hinges screaming as the hatch lifted open. A gust of damp, cold air rushing up from below, smelling faintly metallic and wrong, like wet stone and copper. I descended slowly, each step creaking against the old ladder, the beam of my flashlight slicing through the suffocating darkness, until my boots hit the concrete floor at the bottom. The hallway stretched narrow and endless ahead of me. Walls, sweating condensation, pale light bulbs buzzing overhead, some flickering in irregular rhythms like erratic heartbeats. And in the distance I thought I heard something. A soft, dripping, steady, echoing through the corridor. I moved forward cautiously, the knife held tight, every shadow twisting in the corners of my vision, and then I passed the first door on the right, slightly ajar, its rusted plaque faintly engraved with Unit 27. My breath caught when I pushed it open slowly, the hinges groaning, revealing a small, sterile room inside. Walls lined with metal shelving holding dozens of glass jars, each filled with murky fluid, and floating within them, shapes vaguely human but wrong, distorted faces pressed against, the glass features blurred as though unfinished. My stomach turned violently and I stumbled backward into the hall, gagging into my sleeve, my heartbeat crashing like thunder in my ears. That's when the faint humming started again. This time not from the fields, but from somewhere deep within the node, vibrating through the metal walls, low and layered, like dozens of voices humming in unison just out of sight. I clutched the knife tighter, backing slowly down the hallway until the sound stopped abruptly, replaced by a single metallic clang from behind me. I spun, flashlight cutting through the dark, and froze instantly. The figure from the camera was standing at the far end of the hall, motionless, its silhouette faintly backlit by the single flickering bulb above, arms hanging at its sides. Head bowed slightly forward, I swallowed hard, forcing my voice out. "Who are you?" No response, just silence stretching long and suffocating, until the thing lifted its head slowly, revealing my face, pale and slack, eyes entirely black, and it whispered in my exact voice, soft and deliberate. "Go back." My chest seized as I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over my own boots, and when I blinked, it was gone. The hall empty once again, but the sound of footsteps followed immediately after, soft and deliberate, pacing somewhere ahead. And as I turned the next corner, I froze in place. The concrete floor was wet, smeared faintly with dark streaks leading to a steel door marked control room, and from behind that door came a faint static buzz, like an old TV left on with no signal. I swallowed hard, reaching slowly for the handle, but before I could touch it, the humming surged again from everywhere at once, vibrating through my chest, and the lights overhead began to flicker violently, plunging me into strobing darkness. And in the flashes between light and shadow, I saw them. Dozens of figures at the far end of the corridor, motionless in one frame, closer in the next, their shapes twisted, their faces hidden behind burlap masks. And before the lights steadied, again, they were gone, leaving only the echo of my own ragged breathing in the cold silence. I stood there in the dark kitchen, back pressed against the cold wall, chest heaving, gripping the knife so tight my knuckles ached, the air inside the farmhouse heavy and damp like it had been pulled out of my lungs, the silence thick enough to choke on. And then I heard it. A sound so faint at first I thought it was just the ringing in my ears, but it grew steadily clearer, weaving itself into the night air like threads of smoke, low and melodic. Dozens of voices humming in perfect unison somewhere deep in the fields beyond the house, soft and slow, like an old lullaby carried on the fog. My breath caught, the hair on the back of my neck rising instantly as Grady's 8th rule slammed into my thoughts. When you hear humming in the fields, get inside and lock everything, but I already was inside. Everything locked, every door bolted, yet the sound kept getting louder, closer, surrounding the house like a tightening net. I crept toward the living room window, crouching low, pulling the blinds just a sliver, and froze. The fog outside had grown thicker, heavier, rolling like waves, and through it I saw them, dozens of silhouettes spread across the fields, standing shoulder to shoulder, unmoving, facing the house, their shapes blurred by the mist, but their intent clear. And as the humming grew louder, it wasn't random anymore, there was a pattern to it. Deep, droning notes that vibrated in my chest, pulling at something I didn't understand. I ducked below the window, pressing my back against the couch, forcing myself to breathe slow, counting each inhale when I felt the faintest vibration through the floorboards, subtle but steady, as if the sound was sinking into the house itself, crawling up through the wood and into my bones. I wanted to block my ears but couldn't, terrified I'd miss something worse than a sharp, metallic rattle cut through the humming, the front doorknob twisting hard, shaking violently, the deadbolt straining against the frame. I scrambled on my knees, shoving the couch tighter against the door, And that's when the back door started rattling too. The whole house groaning as the knocks came from both ends now. Slow at first, then harder, faster, thud, thud, thud. Pounding like fists slamming against the walls. My throat dry, breath shallow. And over it all, the humming kept rising. Faster, louder, weaving into the pounding until it was deafening. My heart hammering in my chest like it was trying to match the rhythm. And then suddenly, it stopped. Everything. Silence crashed over the house again, thick and crushing, my ears ringing from the absence of sound. I crouched there, frozen, waiting, the knife trembling in my hand, and then I heard footsteps on the porch, slow and steady, one set closer than before, stopping just outside the door, and a soft voice whispered through the cracks, so faint I almost didn't hear it. "Ethan, look outside." My blood ran cold instantly, my breath catching in my throat because the voice, it was mine. I clamped my mouth shut and backed into the hallway, shaking my head like I could somehow shake the sound away. But then I heard it again, from the other side of the house this time, near the kitchen window. The same voice, identical to mine, whispering my name, coaxing, soft and rhythmic. "Ethan, come out now, we're waiting." I stumbled backward into the shadows, panic clawing at my throat. My breath ragged when the static hissed suddenly from the radio on the counter, loud and distorted, cutting the silence like a scream. And through the garbled noise came a single phrase, robotic and harsh, "Do not speak." I slapped a hand over my mouth instinctively, tears stinging the corners of my eyes, holding my breath as something heavy moved past the kitchen window, casting a shadow across the blinds, slow and deliberate, like it wanted me to know it was. There I crouched lower, gripping the knife so tight my hand cramped, and then came the sound of something dragging against the siding outside. Nails scraping down the wood, circling the house, every step measured, patient, hunting. I closed my eyes, focusing on keeping silent. But then another sound joined it. The creak of the Scarecrow's post in the south field, sharp, splintering. And when I opened my eyes, I realized why. Through the sliver of glass in the kitchen door, I saw the Scarecrow, closer now, no longer tied to its post, standing in the fog at the edge of the yard, its burlap face tilted downward, one straw-stuffed arm twitching slightly, the humming starting again, softer this time but somehow worse, like a warning, like the song itself had teeth. I wanted to back away, but my legs wouldn't move. I blinked once and the Scarecrow was gone. Just empty fog where it had been. My stomach dropping as adrenaline spiked, forcing myself to retreat down the hallway, every step creaking too loud, too heavy. And then something inside the walls groaned deep, low, the vibration traveling, up the beams like the entire house had inhaled, and right then the floor beneath my feet shifted, one board sinking slightly as if something had crawled directly beneath me. I stumbled back, gripping the wall, gasping for breath, when suddenly a crash came from the attic, wood splintering violently, dust cascading down, and then silence. The kind of silence that isn't empty but waiting. I glanced up, throat tight. The ceiling above the hallway warped slightly, sagging as faint scratches ran along it from the inside, heading toward the stairs. I backed away, step by slow step, until my heel brushed against something soft on the floor. I looked down and froze. Muddy footprints, small, barefoot, fresh, trailing from the back door into the hallway, disappearing under the rug where the lifted floorboard had been before. My body locked, heart slamming against my ribs when the humming outside stopped again, replaced by a low, drawn-out creak, and the old windmill arms groaned as they started, spinning backward, slowly, unnaturally against the wind, the motion silent at first, then screaming louder with each turn. And then, from deep in the fog beyond the fields, came dozens of faint whispers layered over one another, voices calling, my name from every direction, soft and hollow, "Ethan, Ethan, Ethan." I clamped my hands over my ears, but the voices didn't stop, vibrating in my skull, pressing into me like invisible hands. I dropped to my knees, squeezing my eyes shut, whispering to myself over and over, "It's not real. It's not real. It's not real." But when I opened them again, there was something standing directly outside the living room window, face pressed against the glass, pale and wrong. its mouth moving soundlessly as its hands smeared long streaks across the fogged-up pane. My stomach flipped, and before I could scream, the lights in the house flickered once, twice, and then died completely, plunging everything into black. The night had gone silent again, the kind of silence that makes your ears ring, the kind that makes you hold your breath without realizing it. But beneath that quiet, I could still hear my heart hammering against my ribs as I crouched in the living room, staring at the front door, every muscle locked, my knife slick with sweat in my hand. And through the blinds I knew they were still there. Those 3 figures by the barn, perfectly still, lined up shoulder to shoulder, and somewhere behind them in the fog that thing still crouched, shifting low and unnatural. I tried to force myself to look away, to think of anything but the rules Grady had drilled into me. Don't open the door after 3:15 a.m. no matter what. I glanced at the clock on the wall and froze. The hands ticked past 3:12. The air inside the farmhouse felt heavier now, thicker somehow, and that's when the old pipes under the sink groaned loudly, making me flinch hard, nearly dropping the knife. I swallowed the panic rising in my throat and checked each window again, double-bolted the kitchen door, even pushed the couch against it for good measure. But deep down I already knew nothing in this place was going to keep something out if it wanted in. I had just finished barricading the side window when I heard it, soft at first, from the far end of the hallway where the back door sat in shadow. 3 slow knocks, heavy, deliberate, thud. 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 The sound carried through the house like a heartbeat. Steady, patient. My throat went dry. My legs froze as if nailed to the floor. The clock clicked to 3:15 a.m. right on time. My mind screamed for me to hide, but my body wouldn't. Listen. And then a voice came through the door, soft, cracked, and horribly familiar. Ethan, it's me, Grady. Open up, son. My stomach twisted violently, bile creeping up the back of my throat. It sounded exactly like him, the rasp in his voice, even the way he dragged the S in my name. But I knew Grady wasn't here. I'd watched him drive away before sundown. I forced my voice into a whisper. Grady, but I didn't move closer. Didn't dare. And the voice came again, more urgent this time. Ethan, listen to me. You have to let me in now. It's not safe out here. My grip on the knife tightened, my breathing shallow, and every instinct inside me screamed one thing. Stay away. The air by the door grew colder, my breath visible in pale clouds, and then, after a long pause, the voice changed, deeper now, stretched unnaturally. Ethan, let me... the words dragged out like they were caught in water. And that's when I knew whatever was out there wasn't Grady. 3 more knocks came, louder this time, rattling the frame, dust falling from the top molding. I stumbled backward, toward the living room, keeping my eyes on the hallway when something brushed past the outside wall. Slow scraping like claws dragging along the siding. Circling the house, I ducked low behind the couch, trying to stay silent, my chest rising and falling in shallow gasps. The knocks stopped, but the footsteps outside continued. Soft crunches on the frozen dirt, pausing by each window, testing the silence. I counted them as they went. 1, 2, 3. But I got to 6 and realized there were more than one set of footsteps now, some heavier, some lighter, moving at different rhythms. I risked a peek through the gap in the blinds and froze instantly. The 3 figures by the barn were gone, the fog swirling where they had stood, but something else was there now, closer. 5, maybe 6 shapes moving slowly toward the porch, tall, thin, jerking slightly with each step, like their bones didn't bend right. I crouched lower, knife trembling in my grip, the old clock on the wall clicking louder than ever, each tick stabbing through the silence, and then the house settled suddenly with a loud creak from the ceiling, dust falling around me. Something up there again, moving deliberately. I glanced, up, every nerve on fire, when a loud bang shook the front porch, the boards outside groaning under weight, and then the handle of the front door started to twist slowly, steady pressure testing the lock. I held my breath, my vision narrowing, and then just as suddenly as it started, everything stopped again. The twisting, the scraping, Even the footsteps, outside, replaced by silence so absolute it made my ears ring. I waited, counting to 10, 20, 30, my muscles locked. But then came the sound that nearly stopped my heart, soft and wet. Just behind me, a single low whisper, right at my ear. Behind you. I spun around violently, swinging the knife through the air, but there was nothing. Just the old hallway stretching empty behind me, my chest heaving, sweat dripping into my eyes. I backed toward the kitchen, moving slow, scanning every shadow. And that's when I saw it. The Scarecrow. The one from the south field, standing in the middle of the hallway, leaning slightly to one side like its neck had been twisted. Burlap sack face tilted down, straw arms dangling limply. I froze, my mind refusing to process what I was seeing. It was inside. It wasn't supposed to be inside. I blinked hard, and when my vision cleared, the hallway was empty again, like it had never been there. My pulse hammering so hard I thought I'd pass out. I staggered into the kitchen, grabbing the old wooden chair by the table and wedging it under the back door handle. Every instinct screaming at me to get upstairs, to get higher ground. But as I placed my foot on the first stair, something groaned from beneath the floorboards, deep and guttural, vibrating through the planks like something massive shifting just under me. I froze, eyes wide, when the static of the kitchen radio broke again, soft and distorted, a voice coming through in whispers. "Don't go up. They're waiting." I stumbled backward off the step, panic clawing at my throat, gripping the knife so tight my hand ached. I pressed myself against the wall, trying to control my breathing. And then the lights flickered once, twice, before going completely out, plunging the house into darkness, my ears filled with the sound of faint breathing, not mine. Slow and ragged, inches from where I stood. And just when I thought my legs would give out, the old wall clock ticked loud in the silence, striking 3:30 a.m., and somewhere out in the fog, close enough I could feel it in my chest, came a deep, guttural moan, low and drawn out. And the floor under me trembled like the earth itself shifted, and I knew then, whatever Grady was trying to protect me from wasn't outside anymore. It was here inside, and it wasn't alone. The lights went out and the farmhouse dropped into complete darkness, thick and suffocating, the kind of black where you can't even see your own hands. My breath hitched, and I stumbled backward into the hallway, gripping the knife tight, chest heaving, ears straining for any sound, and that's when I heard it. A soft creak from the living room, slow, deliberate, floorboards bending under weight. That wasn't mine. My heartbeat thundering so loud it felt like the sound would give me away. I crouched low, sliding a hand along the wall, making my way toward the kitchen for the flashlight I'd dropped. But the silence made every movement unbearable, my boots whispering against the old wood like shouts in an empty church. I reached the counter, fingertips brushing cold metal, when a faint noise cut through the quiet. A wet sound, subtle at first, like someone dragging their palm across damp glass. I froze instantly, turning my head toward the window by the sink, and that's when I saw it, just barely. A faint silhouette, pressed against the outside glass, its face flushed to the pane, unmoving. And before I could even process, the static from the security monitor in the corner cracked back to life even though the power was out, humming faintly like a dying battery. The grainy black and white feed showing the inside of the barn, the light inside still glowing impossibly, and my chest seized because I saw myself again. Another me, standing motionless in the barn doorway, head tilted at an unnatural angle, lips curled into a faint smile that didn't belong to me. I stumbled back into the hallway, gasping for air, slamming my shoulder against the wall. And then came a creak above me, dust raining softly from the ceiling beams, footsteps shifting slowly across the attic, even though there isn't supposed to be an attic. I looked up, throat tight, when a sudden vibration rattled the glass in the kitchen window, and a soft tap echoed through the silence. 3 deliberate knocks against the glass from the outside, the same measured rhythm as the thing at the back door nights ago. My breathing quickened, and then, slicing through the quiet, the old rotary phone on the wall rang, shrill and sharp, so loud it made me flinch, the sound bouncing down the hallway. I hesitated for a moment, remembering Grady's rule. Don't answer the phone after midnight. But something in me snapped. I needed answers. I lunged for the receiver and yanked it to my ear, whispering harshly, "Who is this?" Static hissed for a moment, and then Grady's voice came through, low and urgent. "Ethan, listen carefully. You need to leave the house right now and head to the well. Do not go to the barn. Do not look at it. Do you hear me?" My hand trembled, voice cracking. "What the hell is going on, Grady? What are these things? Why do they look like me?" For a moment there was silence on the line, and then he whispered, almost broken, "They're not copies, son. They're replacements." My stomach dropped, knees buckling as the word sank in. "Replacements? What does that mean?" His voice hardened, shaking like he was holding back panic. "It means they don't want to kill you, Ethan. They want to become you. That's why you can't let them touch you. Do not let them touch you." Before I could respond, the line went dead with a loud click. I stood there, frozen, clutching the receiver, my breath ragged, when the floor beneath me gave a single sharp creak, not from settling wood, but from weight. There was someone behind me. I spun violently, knife raised, but the hallway was empty. Shadows stretching long and thin under the faint sliver of moonlight bleeding through the blinds. I took one shaky step backward and caught movement in my peripheral vision, slow and deliberate. From the far end of the hallway by the old mirror, I turned my head and my blood went cold. The reflection in the mirror wasn't me. I was standing perfectly still, but the reflection tilted its head, grinning faintly, its lips curling just a little too wide, and before I could react, its hand lifted slowly, pressing flat against the glass from the inside. My breath caught as I stepped closer without meaning to, drawn like something unseen was pulling me, until my nose almost brushed the cold surface, and then its smile widened further and its lips moved. But the sound came from behind me, soft and wet, right at my ear. "Don't blink." I stumbled backward, slamming into the wall, scanning the hallway wildly, my chest heaving, and that's when something banged against the front porch, hard enough to rattle the picture frames on the wall. I crept to the living room window, heart pounding so violently I thought it might burst, and pulled the blinds just enough to see outside. The three figures from before, the ones always standing near the barn, were gone. In their place, six now stood in a loose half-circle around the porch, their shapes more defined, tall and crooked, their arms hanging low at unnatural angles. And as I stared, frozen, one of them tilted its head slowly until its neck cracked, loudly, the sound somehow carrying through the glass. Then, in perfect unison, all six figures raised their right hands and pointed directly at the house. My breath hitched, panic clawing up my chest as I stumbled backward, and that's when the sound of rushing water filled my ears, faint at first, then louder, like a river running underground beneath the house. I spun toward the back door and caught sight of the old well through the kitchen window, its cover slightly shifted, just enough to reveal darkness yawning beneath. And then I heard it. A voice rising from inside the well, muffled but clear. The voice of my mother. Dead for 15 years. "Ethan, help me." My knees nearly buckled, heart hammering so violently it hurt, tears stinging my eyes as I stumbled toward the back door, every rational thought screaming at me to stop, that it wasn't real. But the sound of her voice drew me like gravity. I stepped into the cold night air, the fog curling low around my boots, breath clouding in front of me as I approached the well, each step crunching softly against frost-hardened dirt. And when I reached the edge, I leaned over slowly, gripping the damp stone, peering down into the darkness below, whispering, "Mom." A soft scraping echoed up the walls of the well, something shifting far below, and then, rising from the black, came a pale hand, slick and wet, reaching upward toward me, nails jagged, fingers too long, and just as my hand flinched back instinctively, another sound shattered the silence behind me. The creak of the barn door swinging open, slow and deliberate. The faint glow of the light spilling across the fog as a figure stepped out, wearing my jacket, my boots, holding my knife, and smiling, faintly as it whispered in my voice across the empty yard, "We're almost ready." I thought taking a job on a remote farm in Wyoming would be simple. Easy money, just me, a couple of animals, some night walks, and maybe a little silence to clear my head. But from the moment I arrived at the Grady farm, I knew something was wrong. Not in a loud, obvious way, but in the subtle kind of way your gut whispers before your brain catches up. Like the silence here wasn't just quiet, it was heavy, unnatural, as if the land itself was holding its breath and standing on. The porch waiting for me was Mr. Grady, an old man in his late 60s, tall but bent at the shoulders, skin like worn leather from years under the sun, gray beard untrimmed, and eyes that never really looked directly at me. They just sort of drifted past me like he was watching something, standing behind me, his hands trembling slightly as he lit a cigarette and said without even saying hello, "Before we start, there are rules, son, and you follow them or you won't last a week out here." His voice low and coarse like gravel and wind scraping against tin. I tried to laugh, but it died in my throat when I saw his expression. It wasn't a joke. His jaw was tight, his eyes narrowed, and I nodded slowly while he pulled a folded piece of paper from his jacket pocket. But instead of handing it to me, he clenched it in his fist and shook his head. "No, I'll tell you, you listen and you remember them, everyone." So I shoved my hands into my jacket and leaned against the porch railing, trying to act casual. But I could feel his unease crawling up my spine before he even began. "Rule number 1, he said, staring out across the fields where the tall grass swayed lazily under the fading amber light of sunset. "Never leave the farmhouse after 9 p.m. ever." I frowned, thinking maybe it was about coyotes or trespassers, but he cut me off before I could ask, "I mean it, Ethan, don't open that door no matter what you hear, no matter what you see." Then he tapped the railing with 2 fingers like a nervous tick before continuing. "Rule number 2, if the barn lights turn on, don't. Go check it, don't even look too long. Stay inside and close the curtains." I nodded again, forcing a small smile, trying to read his face for any sign that this was just some small-town superstition, but his gaze had turned sharp, locked on me now like he was memorizing my reaction. "Rule number 3, if the phone rings after midnight, don't answer it," I scoffed quietly. "A prank call's gonna kill me." He didn't blink, just blew smoke out through his nose and said, "It won't be a prank and it won't be anyone you want to talk to." My stomach tightened a little then, a cold weight settling in as the wind picked up and brushed through the nearby trees. "Rule 4, he went on, lowering his voice like someone might be listening. "If you hear scratching under the floorboards, ignore it. Don't check it, don't knock back." My eyebrows furrowed. The farmhouse behind him looked solid enough, but suddenly, the thought of something moving beneath it made the entire place seem hollow, fragile. "Rule 5, when the windmill stops spinning, hide immediately under the table in the pantry, wherever you can. Just don't stay out in the open." I almost asked him why, but the way his voice dropped an octave stopped me cold, like he wasn't warning me of a possibility but a certainty. He leaned closer, lowering his cigarette, and I caught the faint smell of whiskey on his breath when he said, "Rule 6, if someone knocks on the door after 3:15 a.m., don't open it, not even if it sounds like me." I laughed nervously and muttered, "Why would you be here at 3 in the morning?" He didn't smile, just flicked his cigarette into the dirt and muttered, "I won't be." Then after a long pause, he swallowed hard and said, "Rule 7, stay away from the Scarecrow in the south field. Don't touch it, don't talk to it, don't even stand too close." I blinked, confused, thinking maybe he was messing with me until I realized his voice had dropped to barely a whisper. "That thing moves." The words hung between us like a lead weight, and I shifted uncomfortably but said nothing, just listening as the dying sunlight painted his face in long shadows. "Rule 8, he said, clearing his throat. "If you hear humming in the fields, get inside and lock everything. Windows, doors, all of it." My hands started sweating despite the cool air, and I rubbed them against my jeans, glancing past him toward the tall fields that stretched endlessly into the foggy horizon. "Rule 9, don't step into the burned dirt circle near the silo. Don't even walk close to it," I asked. "What's in it?" And he just shook his head slowly, muttering, "Not what? Who?" My chest tightened then, a sharp little spike of unease that wouldn't go away. "Rule 10, if you see yourself working in the barn, leave him there. Let him be. Don't interfere. Don't call out." My mouth went dry instantly. "What the hell does that even mean?" I asked, but he ignored me. "Rule 11, don't ever look down the old well." His tone so flat it chilled me more than shouting would have. And finally, "Rule 12, on the last night, you'll know what to do." I waited for him to explain, but he just sighed, rubbed his temples, and whispered, "Do exactly as I said, Ethan, or this farm will swallow you whole," before turning away and disappearing inside without another word, leaving me standing there alone as the evening shadows stretched across the fields and the wind carried a low rustling sound through the corn, like distant whispering voices. I stayed out there for a while, replaying his rules in my head, trying to convince myself he was just an old paranoid farmer. But by the time I finally stepped inside the farmhouse and shut the door, the weight of the silence had become oppressive, almost suffocating. I checked the windows twice, locking each one, cooked myself a quick dinner, then turned on the old radio in the kitchen for company, static filling the space until it landed faintly on some AM station humming gospel tunes. By 8:30, I'd already decided this was going to be an easy gig. Maybe Grady was just overly cautious after living alone for decades. But as I sat in the living room with a cup of coffee, my boots up on the worn rug, my eyes kept drifting to the old clock on the wall, its tick-tock louder than it should have been, crawling toward 9 o'clock, and just as the second hand clicked into place at exactly 9:01 p.m., I saw it, faint, distant, through the cracked blinds. The barn lights turned on by themselves, glowing pale yellow through the fog, and even though every instinct screamed to stay seated, my body tensed, breath caught in my throat, heart hammering against my ribs. And that's when I heard it. Soft at first, but growing louder. Something scratching under the floorboards, slow, deliberate, right beneath my chair. Morning came, but it didn't feel like morning. The light creeping through the blinds was gray, washed out, the kind of pale daylight that feels wrong, like the sun had forgotten how to rise. I barely slept, sitting in the corner of the living room with the hunting knife in my lap, replaying every sound from last night, the humming, the whispers, the figure pressed against the window, and trying to convince myself I had imagined most of it. But my bones knew better, my gut still coiled tight with unease. When I finally stood, my legs stiff, I checked each door, each window, making sure everything was still locked. It was quiet now. Too quiet. The kind of silence that presses against your skull until you hear your own heartbeat. I needed answers. And as much as every instinct screamed at me to stay inside, I found myself grabbing my boots and jacket, stepping out onto the porch, the boards creaking beneath my weight. The fog still clung low to the fields, thick and heavy like damp wool, muting every sound, and as I crossed the yard toward the silo, I felt it, the sensation of being watched, a crawling itch at the back of my neck. My boots crunched over frost-hardened soil until I reached the southern fence, where the grass abruptly stopped and the dirt turned black, scorched into a perfect circle maybe 15 feet across, smooth as glass and darker than coal. I stopped, short heart pounding, remembering Grady's 9th rule: do not step into the burned dirt circle near the silo. Standing at the edge, I could see faint patterns carved into the charred soil, spirals etched deep like something had burned them there from underneath. My chest tightened as the wind picked up, carrying a faint metallic tang that made my tongue taste like pennies. And that's when I noticed the smell. Sweet at first, then sour, thick enough to turn my stomach. I followed it around the edge of the circle until I saw it. The remains of a sheep, skin peeled cleanly away, no blood, no sign of struggle, its legs folded neatly beneath it like someone had placed it there. My throat tightened, bile rising, and I stumbled back a step, covering my mouth with my sleeve, forcing myself to breathe slow. That's when I saw movement out of the corner of my eye. A figure standing just beyond the silo, half hidden in the fog, its outline blurred but familiar. I froze, whispering hoarsely into the still air, "Grady?" But the figure didn't respond, just stood there, facing me, perfectly still. I blinked and it was gone, like it had dissolved into the mist, and suddenly the silence pressed harder, thick and suffocating. I turned to head back toward the farmhouse, quickening my pace, when something strange caught my attention. A faint distortion stretching across the ground like heat waves rising from asphalt. Except the air was cold, freezing even, and when I glanced down I felt my chest seize. My shadow wasn't moving right. I lifted my hand slowly. The shadow lagged behind, jerky, delayed, like a broken film reel trying to catch up. My breath turned shallow, my entire body trembling as I waved my hand frantically, the shadow twitching. Seconds later, mocking me, moving wrong, and then, as I stood frozen, its head turned. My shadow turned its head to look at me. I stumbled backward, heart slamming into my ribs, tripping on frozen dirt as panic clawed up my throat, and in that instant a sound broke the silence, a low, steady hum rising again from somewhere deep, within the fields, louder this time, closer, vibrating in my chest. I spun toward the noise, scanning the fog, and that's when I saw them. The same figures from last night, scattered across the field beyond the circle, dozens of them, unmoving, facing me. Their shapes were clearer now, too clear, long-limbed, twisted slightly, heads cocked unnaturally to one side as if listening, their faces obscured by sacks or masks, and behind them, far off near the tree line, something bigger shifted in the mist, low to the ground, crawling on elongated limbs that bent the wrong way. I stumbled back farther, the knife slick in my grip, and when I turned, I saw something that made my blood run cold. Someone was standing inside the circle. It was me. My breath hitched, knees nearly giving out as I stared because the figure inside the burned dirt looked exactly like me. Same jacket, same boots, same knife gripped in the same trembling hand. But its eyes were wrong, black and hollow. Its mouth pulled into a faint smile that didn't belong to me. It tilted its head slightly, mimicking the motion I made seconds before, then raised its free hand and pointed directly at me. The humming stopped instantly, replaced by silence so thick it rang in my ears, and I backed away step by step until my heel caught a root, and I stumbled hard, hitting the frozen ground. When I looked back up, the other me was gone. The circle, empty, but the figures in the fog were closer now. Too close, no longer scattered, but forming a half ring around the silo, trapping me between them and the farmhouse. My chest tightened, lungs burning as I sprinted back toward the porch, boots pounding the ground, my vision blurring from adrenaline. But halfway across the yard, something flickered in the window of the house. The outline of a person standing, perfectly still in the living room, watching me, its face obscured in shadow. I froze mid-step, heart hammering, the cold biting into my lungs, because I was inside the house right now. I shouldn't be seeing myself there. The figure tilted, its head slightly, just like the one inside the circle had done, and then it stepped back into the darkness, vanishing from the window. My legs shook as I bolted the rest of the way to the porch, fumbling with the door handle, slamming it shut behind me, throwing every lock into place, my breath ragged and loud in the silence. I pressed my back against the door, listening, waiting, but there was no sound, no footsteps, no humming, nothing but my heartbeat thundering in my ears, until a soft tap came from the window beside me, sharp and deliberate, like a finger gently rapping against the glass. I turned my head slowly, terrified to look but unable to stop myself, and through the thin curtain I saw the faint silhouette of a hand pressed flat against the pane, long fingers spread unnaturally wide, nails dark against the frost. I took a shaky step back, gripping the knife with both hands, and whispered to myself, "It's not real, it's not real." But then the hand slid downward, dragging slow against the glass, leaving behind faint streaks, and a voice, low and smooth, came from right behind me, though I was alone in the room. "You stepped too close." I stood frozen in the middle of the living room, my back pressed against the cold wooden door, gripping the knife so hard my hand had gone numb, my breath shallow and ragged. The only sound in the house was the old clock ticking far too loud, each second dragging out like a hammer blow. And I couldn't shake the image burned into my head, the thing inside the burned circle, the other me, smiling, pointing at me like it already knew how this was going to end. I wanted to believe I'd imagined it, that I was losing it from lack of sleep, but deep down I knew better. The rules Grady gave me weren't just paranoia, they were survival. I had crossed too close, and now something had noticed me. I paced slowly across the creaking floorboards, forcing my breathing to slow, when a faint electronic click snapped me out of my thoughts, sharp and clean, and I turned toward the sound. It was coming from the corner shelf where the small security monitor sat, the one I hadn't touched since I moved in, the one Grady said I didn't need because the farm watches itself. The monitor's static hummed to life, Grainy black and white footage flickering, switching through cameras I didn't even know existed. And when it stopped, it froze on a view of the barn, its doors wide open though I'd locked them earlier. Inside the pale glow of a single hanging bulb, and there, hunched over, back turned to the camera, was me. My chest tightened instantly, a tremor running through my body. I stumbled closer to the monitor, whispering under my breath, "No. No, no, no." Shaking my head violently like it would change what I was seeing. The figure in the barn was wearing my jacket, my boots, even the same torn cuff on my right sleeve, its movements jerky, mechanical, like it didn't quite understand how to use the body it was in. And then, as if it sensed me watching, it stopped mid-motion, frozen perfectly still for several seconds before slowly, so slowly, it turned its head toward the camera. Its face came into view under the pale bulb, and I felt my stomach drop, bile burning my throat. It was my face, but wrong. The skin pale, stretched too tight, the smile too wide, the eyes bottomless pits of black that swallowed the light. And then, without breaking eye contact with the camera, it raised one hand slowly and waved at me. My knees nearly gave out, panic flooding my veins as I slammed the monitor off, plunging the living room back into silence. But that silence didn't last. Outside, near the barn, came the faint metallic creak of the windmill spinning slowly, impossibly, despite the dead stillness in the air. And layered under it, faint but growing, the low guttural humming started again, dozens of voices vibrating through the fog, louder with each passing second. Surrounding the house like a noose tightening, I backed away from the monitor, chest heaving, heading for the hallway when the porch boards groaned, a heavy weight shifting just outside. I froze instantly, ears straining. Then a sudden, sharp knock on the glass window beside me made me jump violently, knife raised, but when I turned there was nothing. Just condensation smeared across the inside of the pane like someone had been breathing against it from the outside. I stumbled backward and hit the wall, heart pounding, when a sudden screech of feedback erupted from the kitchen radio, loud, enough to make me drop the knife, clutching my ears, static filling the room until it resolved into a faint voice, distorted but deliberate. "Don't go to the barn." I spun toward the door instantly, like something had called my name, but before I could even take a step, another sound joined it. A muffled scream carried faintly on the wind, high-pitched, sharp, coming from somewhere deep inside the fog-covered fields. My throat tightened, panic clawing up my chest. It sounded human, too human to ignore. I stood frozen, every instinct screaming at me to stay put, but something else in me, stubborn and terrified, needed to know what was out there. I grabbed the flashlight off the table, snatched the knife from the floor, and slowly eased the front door open just enough to slip outside. The cold hitting me like a wall, my breath turning white immediately, the fog swallowing sound and light as I crept down the porch steps, boots crunching softly against the frost-covered dirt. The scream didn't come again, but I could feel it. Something was out there waiting. I moved cautiously across the yard, scanning left and right, until I caught a faint movement near the silo, just a shadow slipping between thicker fog. I angled the flashlight and froze. The burned circle was glowing faintly now, thin veins of dim red light threading through the cracks in the soil like embers. Breathing, and standing just outside its edge was a figure. Back turned, head bowed, arms limp at its sides. I took one step closer, my breath sharp and shallow, whispering to myself, "It's not real, it's not real." But then the figure twitched, its head jerking slightly before snapping to face me, and I felt my stomach lurch violently. It was me again, standing there, expressionless, but as I stared, its movements mirrored mine exactly, like a broken reflection come to life. I stepped back and it stepped forward, slow, deliberate, matching me. My voice cracked when I whispered, "What do you want?" And the thing tilted its head, smiling faintly, and whispered back in my voice perfectly clear, "You." I turned and bolted, sprinting across the yard, boots pounding the frozen ground, chest burning, aiming for the porch. But halfway there, something in the corner of my vision made me skid to a stop. The barn lights were on again, blazing bright. Through the fog and inside, silhouetted against the glow, Another me was standing perfectly still, head tilted, watching. I backed away, my legs trembling, when I heard the sound of glass shattering behind me, spinning around to see one of the kitchen windows cracked inward. A long, pale hand forcing through, nails blackened and jagged, reaching blindly like it could smell me. I scrambled up the porch steps, wrenching the front door open, slamming it shut behind me, locking every bolt, chest heaving. The flashlight clattering to the floor as I stumbled back into the hallway, ears ringing. But it wasn't over, not even close, because the static erupted, again from the monitor even though I'd turned it off, this time showing a live feed of the living room from somewhere high in the corner, and in the footage. I watched myself walk into the frame and sit slowly in the chair across from me, staring straight at where I was standing right now, motionless, smiling faintly. And then the power in the entire house cut out with a loud snap, plunging me into total darkness. I stood frozen in the flickering corridor deep beneath the silo, the concrete walls sweating dampness, my flashlight trembling in my hand, the air heavy with the metallic stench of rust and something sweet rotting underneath, and behind me the faint hum of dozens of low voices still vibrated through the pipes, layered, distorted like they weren't speaking words but breathing sound. My boots scraping softly against the wet floor as I backed slowly toward the junction when the security monitor behind the glass door in the control room snapped to life by itself, a grainy feed filling the small wall-mounted screen, my chest seizing when I realized it was showing a live view of the farmhouse above, the living room, lit faintly by moonlight. And standing there in the center of the frame was me. Not one of the distorted copies, not the pale-eyed doppelganger, but me exactly as I looked now, head bowed, holding the same knife I had in my hand, and for a long moment I stared at the footage, unable to breathe, until the thing on screen slowly raised its head and looked straight into the camera, straight through the monitor directly at me, and whispered, perfectly clear despite the static, "You shouldn't have come down here." My heart thundered violently in my ears, my lungs seizing with shallow breaths, and before I could even react, the hallway light above me flickered violently and cut out entirely, plunging me into total darkness, the humming around me stopping, instantly leaving only silence so heavy it crushed my chest. Then came the first sound. Footsteps slow and deliberate. From somewhere down the hall, boots on wet concrete, soft but steady. And I spun, swinging the flashlight wildly, the beam cutting through thick shadows, catching nothing but steel and damp walls. But the footsteps kept coming, steady, unhurried, until they stopped completely, replaced by a soft, wet breath just inches behind me. I turned sharply, knife raised, but there was no one there. Just cold air rushing past my neck like something had leaned in close and exhaled. And then the humming returned, not faint this time, but loud, oppressive, filling the node, vibrating through the walls until dust rained down from the pipes, my teeth rattling from the pressure. I stumbled back against the cold concrete, and that's when I saw them. Dozens of figures filling the corridor ahead, emerging from the darkness in staggered frames under the faint emergency strobes that flickered dimly along the walls, each strobe freezing them closer, closer, until they stopped just 20 feet away, perfectly still, their burlap-covered faces turned toward me, arms slack at their sides, and then in perfect unison they all tilted their heads at the exact same angle, their necks cracking loudly in the silence, the sound ripping through me like a spike. My knees trembled violently, sweat dripping into my eyes, my chest tightening as I raised the knife instinctively, though I knew it wouldn't save me. And then the radio clipped to the wall nearby, the one Grady had told me never to touch, buzzed sharply to life with a burst of static before his voice came through, ragged and panicked. "Ethan, they're not hunting you anymore, they're hurting you. Get out of Node S4 right now," I shouted back into the empty hall, voice cracking. "Grady, I can't, there's too many. What the hell are they?" His voice came again, low and urgent. "They're trying to bring you to the original, the one we buried. Do not let it touch you, Ethan, or it'll overwrite you. You'll stop existing." Before I could reply, the transmission died instantly, and that's when I realized the corridor wasn't silent anymore. Somewhere ahead, deep within the node, I could hear chains rattling, metal grinding against stone, and a faint dragging sound, slow and wet, approaching closer with every second. My throat tightening until I couldn't breathe properly. My body begging me to run, but my legs refusing to move, rooted to the concrete like prey under a predator's stare. And then, without warning, the floor trembled under my boots as the massive steel door at the far end of the node burst open violently, slamming into the wall with a thunderous crash, and the humming stopped instantly, replaced by something far worse. Silence so deep it swallowed every sound except my own shaking breath. Something emerged from the darkness behind the door, crawling low on elongated limbs, its body wrong, thin but heavy, every joint bending backward unnaturally, the pale emergency strobes flashing across its skin that glistened wet under the dim light, and its head, God, its head, was wrong, too human and not human at all. A perfect replica of my face stretched too tightly over a skull slightly too large, the features exact but warped in the smallest ways, and its lips moved slowly. As it whispered my name, soft and calm, Ethan, my stomach dropped violently, the knife slipping slightly in my hand as my pulse screamed in my ears. I stumbled back, boots skidding on the slick floor, but the thing didn't rush me, didn't move fast at all. It just stood there, head tilted, watching, waiting, and then it raised one hand slowly and pointed at my chest. In the same instant, the lights flickered back on, every bulb burning at full brightness as dozens of other figures began to emerge from side doors all along the corridor, unfinished copies with smooth, blank faces and half-formed limbs, crawling, twitching, reaching toward me as they filled the hallways like a living tide, my lungs seizing as I spun and ran, boots pounding against wet concrete, sprinting blind toward the ladder leading up to the surface, the knife clattering against my leg with every desperate step, the humming returning again behind me, louder, layered like a choir chasing me through the steel halls. I hit the base of the ladder and scrambled upward, hands slick with sweat, boots slipping on damp rungs, dragging myself up into the freezing night air, collapsing onto the frost-covered dirt just as a deep guttural roar bellowed from below, so loud it shook the silo itself. I scrambled to my feet, running toward the farmhouse, lungs burning, vision blurring, but halfway there, the lights in the barn blazed bright, every bulb glowing white-hot through the fog, and standing in the doorway silhouetted perfectly were three of me, shoulder to shoulder, motionless, watching silently as I passed. My chest tightened violently, my lungs screaming for air, and I pushed harder, slamming into the farmhouse door and locking it behind me, collapsing to the floor, knife clenched so tight my hand trembled uncontrollably, tears stinging the corners of my eyes as I gasped for breath. I didn't know how long I sat there, rocking slightly, knife in my lap, until the old rotary phone on the wall rang softly, just once. I stared at it, frozen, shaking, and after a long silence, the voice came, faint, flat, bleeding through the wires. "It's done, Ethan, you're already one of us." I sat frozen in that worn-out armchair, coffee mug trembling slightly in my hands, staring through the cracked blinds at the faint glow of the barn lights cutting through the fog, my pulse pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. And underneath all of that was another sound, faint but steady, a soft, deliberate scratching beneath the floorboards right under my boots, like nails dragging across old wood, slow and measured. And for a moment I thought maybe it was a raccoon or some stray animal caught under there, but then I remembered Grady's voice in my head, sharp and low. "If you hear scratching under the floorboards, ignore it." So I clenched my jaw and forced myself to stay seated, my knuckles white around the mug, trying to convince myself it was nothing. But the sound didn't stop. It grew louder, clearer, and then it changed. No longer random scratching. It became a pattern. 3 slow drags, then 2 sharp taps, pause, then repeated again, almost like someone knocking from underneath the house. I swallowed hard, leaning forward, holding my breath, trying to hear beyond the radio's faint static hum, and then something else joined, in a faint whisper, like air escaping between the cracks, and I swear I heard my name in it, soft but distinct. Then my chest tightened. My hand instinctively reached for the small hunting knife on the table, but my mind screamed at me not to move. Grady's warning looping over and over, "Ignore it, ignore it, ignore it." Yet the scratching crept closer to where I sat until I could feel subtle vibrations through the wooden planks under my boots, the air around me growing colder, though the heater was still humming, my breath faintly visible in front of me now. I turned down the radio until it was almost silent, every creak of the farmhouse amplified, and then, just when I thought I'd imagined it, the scratching stopped, sudden and absolute, replaced by a silence so thick it made my ears ring. and I almost relaxed until something shifted directly below me, like weight settling on beams, a dull, hollow thump. And then, impossibly, a slow inhale beneath the floor, deep and wet, like lungs dragging air for the first time. My fingers tightened around the knife handle as I sat paralyzed, staring at the gap beneath the old rug in front of me where one board was slightly lifted, warped over time. And that's when I saw it. Just for a fraction of a second, something pale, something smooth, brushing the underside of the floorboard, like fingertips pressing up against it before sliding away. My stomach turned, my throat dry, my instincts screaming to leave, but my legs rooted to the chair until the silence was broken by a sharp creak somewhere above me this time, near the hallway leading to the kitchen. I turned my head slowly, sweat rolling down my temple. The kitchen was dark now except for the faint amber glow of the stove clock, 9:34 p.m. And then came a second creak, closer, deliberate, like someone stepping barefoot on old wood, but I was alone, I was sure of it. Or at least I thought I was, until I remembered that when I locked the door earlier, I hadn't checked the back one by the laundry room, heart pounding. I set the mug down as quietly as I could and stood up, each board groaning under my weight like it was warning me to sit back down. But I forced myself toward the hallway, gripping the knife tighter, my breathing shallow, every step stretching time longer. The scratching had stopped completely, but my ears rang with phantom echoes of it. The hallway was colder than the living room. The draft heavier, the shadows thicker, stretching unnaturally across the walls like something alive. When I reached the back door, my hand hesitated above the lock, bracing for something awful, but when I touched it, the latch was secure, locked from the inside. Relief washed over me for only a second before I noticed something strange. The doorknob was freezing cold, colder than it should have been, like ice had crawled up from the outside, and just as I pulled my hand back, a soft tap came from the other side of the door, faint. 3 knocks, perfectly spaced. My body stiffened, remembering Grady's 6th rule. If someone knocks after 3:15 a.m., don't open it, even if it sounds like me. But I glanced at the clock on the stove again, 9:37 p.m., too early for that rule to matter, so why the hell was someone knocking now? I held my breath and stepped back, knife raised, waiting. But there was nothing, no voice, no movement, just silence swallowing the air around me until the sound of faint crunching outside and the gravel started circling toward the front porch. Slow and steady, I tiptoed back through the hall into the living room and crouched near the front window, peeking through the blinds. The fog outside was so thick it clung to the glass, but I could see faint shadows shifting near the barn, tall and thin, more than one, moving unnaturally, jerking like frames missing in a broken film reel. And then the barn lights flickered once, twice, and went dark again, plunging the yard back into darkness. My chest tightened as adrenaline surged, forcing myself to step away from the window. And that's when the scratching started again, but this time from the opposite side of the room, deeper, faster, like whatever was beneath had moved closer to the far wall. My panic rising as I backed toward the hallway when suddenly the radio in the kitchen snapped with loud static, buzzing violently like it had picked up some kind of interference, and through the distortion came a voice, faint but distinct, low and rasped. "Don't look under." Before the transmission cut out completely with a loud pop, my body froze, knife trembling in my hand. I didn't know whether to run, hide, or scream. But before I could decide, the lifted floorboard under the rug creaked softly, and I saw it shift. Slowly, like pressure was being applied from underneath, and then something thin and pale forced its way up through the crack, curling around the edge of the plank. It looked like a hand, but longer, bonier, nails blackened and jagged. My breath caught, and without thinking, I stumbled backward into the hallway, slamming my shoulder against the wall, and that's when the front door rattled violently, the knob twisting like someone trying to force it open, the entire frame shaking, my heart hammering in my throat. But then, just as quickly as it started, everything stopped again. The scratching, the door, the voices, the static, absolute silence returning like the house had never made a sound. I stood there frozen, every muscle in my body locked, staring at the rug where that thing had tried to push through. The floorboard still slightly lifted, and as the silence dragged on longer and longer, I started to think maybe I'd imagined it all. Until a low groan echoed beneath the house again, followed by one quiet whisper right against the floor. "Ethan." I stood there frozen in the dark hallway, every muscle tight, still gripping the knife like it was the only thing tethering me to reality. My ears straining in the heavy silence after hearing my name whispered from beneath the floor. And for a long minute I didn't breathe, didn't move, just waited for another sound, but nothing came. Only the faint hum of the old fridge in the kitchen and the tick of the wall clock dragging seconds like hours. Eventually I backed away from the lifted floorboard, slow and careful, my footsteps light on the creaking planks, forcing myself to return to the living room, my mind screaming to leave the farmhouse entirely. But Grady's first rule echoed in my head: never leave the house after 9 p.m. So I stayed, pacing near the window, trying to control my breathing. Keeping one ear tuned to the floor as the scratching seemed to have stopped. The barn lights outside had gone dark too, and for a moment I thought maybe it was over. Maybe whatever was under there had gone back to wherever it came from. But then, at exactly 12:17 a.m., the silence broke with a sharp, shrill ring from the old rotary phone mounted on the kitchen wall, the sound slicing through the quiet like a knife. I nearly jumped out of my skin, staring at it as if the thing had grown teeth, and Grady's voice came flooding back immediately. "Rule number 3, if the phone rings after midnight, don't answer." My gut clenched. Every instinct screamed to let it ring, but I stood frozen, counting the seconds between each chime. 1, 2, 3. It didn't stop, ringing again and again in a relentless cycle. Something primal in me wanted the noise to end. My hand hovered near it without realizing, trembling, when on the 7th ring it stopped suddenly, silence crushing down on me, and just as relief started to wash through me, the phone clicked softly and picked up by itself. No one had touched it. A faint hiss of static filled the kitchen, and then I heard my own voice, low, distorted, but unmistakably mine. "Don't listen to him." My blood ran cold instantly, gripping the counter with my free hand, leaning closer to the receiver though I hadn't touched it. The voice came again, clearer this time, matching my tone exactly but laced with something darker, flatter. "He's lying, Ethan. He wants you here, so it can find you." My throat went dry, my thoughts scrambled, whispering hoarsely under my breath like an idiot talking to static. Who are you?" The voice laughed softly, breathless, uneven, the sound crackling with distortion. "You already know." Then silence and the line went dead, the old rotary dial clicking softly back into place. I stood there numb, staring at the phone like it might explode. My reflection faint in the dark kitchen window, pale and sweat-soaked, chest rising and falling in quick shallow bursts. I tried to rationalize, to tell myself it was interference, a prank, maybe some crossed wires from town. But deep down I knew better. There was something wrong here, something worse than Grady had warned me about. I grabbed my jacket, half thinking about bolting out into the night despite the first rule, when a deep, slow creak came from above me, the ceiling settling under weight that wasn't mine. I tilted my head back, staring at the warped planks overhead, holding my breath, and then another soft thump followed by dragging steps, deliberate, measured, like someone barefoot moving slowly across the attic. Except there was no attic, just low rafters under the roof. Grady hadn't mentioned anyone else living here. My hand tightened on the knife again, backing toward the hallway as dust drifted down from the ceiling with each groaning board. Then silence again. And in that silence, something else slipped, in the faint sound of static from the living room radio. It had turned itself back on, the volume low, just white noise hissing like wind over dead air. I crept closer, each step heavier than the last, and that's when the static warped, bending unnaturally until a voice emerged from it, the same one from the phone, still mine but wrong. "Don't look at the floor," it whispered. But the problem was I already had, and when I did, my heart stopped. The lifted board under the rug was gone, shifted completely aside, leaving a black gap into the crawl space below. And from that gap, something pale and slender was reaching out, slow and patient, curling around the edges of the plank like fingers stretching toward me. Nails long, cracked, tips scraping against the wood with each movement. I stumbled back, kicking over a chair, the clatter echoing through the house like a gunshot, and the thing beneath froze completely still as if startled by the noise. I held my breath, knife shaking in my hand, watching, waiting, and just when I thought maybe it had retreated, its head started to rise, impossibly thin, hairless, grayish-white, eyes too wide and glossy, no reflection in them, its mouth twitching open like a puppet forcing speech, but no sound came. I staggered, backward into the hallway wall, panic surging like electricity, and that's when the old landline phone shrieked again, louder this time, forcing me to slap a hand over my mouth to keep from screaming. The ringing sharp, constant, unnatural. The thing beneath the floor jerked violently at the sound and then dropped back into the darkness with a soft, wet thud. Vanishing from sight, I rushed into the kitchen, yanking the cord from the wall with both hands until the ringing cut off, chest heaving, sweat dripping from my jaw. The silence that followed somehow worse than the sound itself. I leaned against the counter, trying to steady my breathing when from outside, faint but carried on the wind, I heard humming, low and rhythmic, like a group of voices chanting together somewhere in the fields. My stomach twisted as Grady's 8th rule flashed in my head. If you hear humming in the fields, get inside and lock everything. I ran through the house, slamming every window shut, bolting doors, dragging an old chair against the front entrance, heart pounding harder than ever. And then I made the mistake of peeking through the blinds. The fog outside was thicker than before, rolling low across the fields, shapes shifting in it like shadows alive. And then I saw movement near the barn, a tall figure standing perfectly still in the mist, face obscured. But as I stared, I realized it wasn't one, it was 3, lined up shoulder to shoulder, not moving, not breathing, watching the house. And somewhere far off in the distance, almost too quiet to catch, came the faint creak of the windmill slowing to a stop. The humming stopped as suddenly as it had begun, leaving the night so quiet it almost hurt my ears, the silence pressing in until it felt like the walls of the farmhouse were shrinking around me. And that's when I heard it, the long metallic groan of the windmill blades slowing, their squealing echoing faintly across the dark fields. My breath hitched as I remembered Grady's 5th rule. When the windmill stopped spinning, hide immediately. My chest tightened, and I stumbled, backward scanning the windows. The fog outside so thick now that the lights of the barn were swallowed completely. The only sound left was the creak of the blades struggling against the dead wind, until with a final low screech, they stopped completely, the spinning arms frozen, mid-motion, and then there was nothing. Just silence and my heart pounding so violently it almost drowned out the faint crunch of gravel from somewhere outside. Footsteps, soft at first but steady, deliberate, circling the farmhouse. I ducked behind the couch, gripping the hunting knife so tight it bit into my palm, straining to hear over the blood roaring in my ears. The steps moved past the porch, slow, unhurried, like whoever, or whatever, was out there knew I couldn't leave. I crouched lower, peeking through the bottom of the blinds just enough to catch a glimpse of the yard, and froze. A figure was standing in the fog just at the edge of the porch light, tall and thin, its shoulders jerking slightly like a puppet trying to breathe. I swallowed hard and clamped a hand over my mouth, but before I could process what I was seeing, the figure moved in a sudden, sharp twitch, unnaturally fast, disappearing out of sight. My lungs burned as I forced myself to stay silent, knees aching from crouching, and then 3 slow knocks came at the back door, deliberate, heavy, the sound vibrating through the wooden frame. I remembered Grady's 6th rule. If someone knocks after 3:15 a.m., don't open it, even if it sounds like me. But I glanced at the stove clock glowing faintly in the kitchen. It was 2:56 a.m., too early. My heart racing as the knocks came again, louder this time, closer, like whoever it was had pressed their face against the door. I waited, holding my breath, when, from the other side came a voice, cracked and low. "Ethan, open up, it's me." I froze instantly, my hand trembling, my lips barely forming a whisper. "Grady?" But then I remembered. Grady had left for town hours ago. I saw his truck drive off. He couldn't be here. The voice came again, louder. "Now, Ethan, it's cold out here, open the door." My legs stiffened and I backed away from the hallway. the hunting knife slick in my grip, and then the knock stopped, replaced by the faint sound of nails dragging slowly down the wooden door, screeching soft but deliberate, like whoever or whatever was tracing my name into the frame. I couldn't move, I couldn't breathe. And then the silence returned, broken only by a soft creak from above. My eyes darted up at the ceiling, faint dust drifting down with each sound. There were footsteps overhead again, slow, pacing, deliberate, circling the roofline above me. I backed into the living room, clutching the knife, my eyes locked on the floorboard that had shifted the night before, half expecting it to move again, when suddenly the radio on the counter snapped on by itself, static hissing sharply before, cutting into a faint, distorted whisper. "It's inside." My body went rigid as I spun, scanning every shadow, and then I heard the front porch creak, long and slow, like weight shifting on old boards. I crouched low and peeked through the blinds. The fog outside so dense I could barely make out the fence line, but something was standing there now, closer than before, right at the edge of the light. It was tall, thin, dressed in overalls like an old farmhand, but its head was wrong. A burlap sack tied over it, mouth stitched shut, and its chest rose and fell with jagged, shallow breaths. My stomach turned and I ducked lower, holding back a gasp, watching as it tilted its head unnaturally far to one side, like it had heard me. And then, without warning, it sprinted across the yard in a blur and vanished into the fog. I held my breath for what felt like minutes, my entire body shaking. And then somewhere deep in the fields came a sound I'll never forget. A slow, rhythmic creak, like rope under tension. I turned toward the south window, the one facing the Scarecrow field, and froze. The Scarecrow was gone, the crooked wooden post standing empty under the thin wash of moonlight, my breath caught in my throat, Grady's seventh rule echoing in my skull. Stay away from the Scarecrow. It moves. And suddenly something brushed past the porch window, fast, close enough to rattle the frame. I stumbled backward, kicking over the chair, glass shaking, my heart thundering as the lights flickered violently, plunging the living room into near darkness before flaring back to life with a faint hum. I steadied myself, forcing my breath to slow, and then the phone rang again, the shrill sound splitting the silence like a knife. I stared at it, muscles locking in place, remembering the last call. But this time I didn't move, didn't breathe. The ringing echoed once, twice, 3 times, and then stopped, replaced by faint static bleeding through the speaker like before. And then came a voice, a whisper that wasn't mine this time, deep and wet, gurgling like water caught in lungs. "Look outside." Against every instinct I had, I inched closer to the blinds, hands shaking so hard I almost dropped the knife, and I pulled the slats just enough to peek. The yard beyond bathed in pale silver fog, silent, unmoving. And then I saw them. 3 figures lined up near the barn, the same as the night before, but now closer, and behind them in the mist, something else moved, larger, crouched low, long, limbs shifting unnaturally, too many joints bending the wrong way. My breath caught in my throat as one of the standing figures slowly raised its hand and pointed directly at the house. Directly at me. I dropped the blinds instantly, heart hammering, stumbling backward into the center of the room, gripping the knife so tight my knuckles ached, the old floor creaking beneath my boots. And then, faintly, so faintly, I thought I imagined it, a whisper slid through the vents. "Ethan, don't hide." I woke in the living room chair, the knife still clenched in my hand, the dim orange glow of the oil lamp throwing weak shadows across the walls, my neck stiff and aching from falling asleep sitting up. The silence inside the farmhouse so deep, I could hear the faint ticking of the old wall clock and the low creak of the rafters above. And for a moment I almost convinced myself that last night had been a dream, that the faint humming, the shifting shadows, the sense of being watched, none of it was real. But then I noticed the back door was open 2 inches, the lock undone, and I froze completely, my lungs seizing as my eyes traced the faint, muddy footprints leading from the kitchen door, out into the yard, small and barefoot, stopping abruptly near the edge of the porch. My breath caught, and I moved silently to the window, peeking out through the narrow gap in the blinds, and the field stretched out in pale silver fog, the Scarecrow still standing crookedly in the south patch where I'd seen it the first day. But something about it felt wrong now. Its head tilted farther than it should, straw arms drooping unnaturally low, and as I squinted through the mist, I realized its shadow stretched too long, far longer than it should in the dim moonlight, reaching nearly 20 feet across the dirt. My stomach tightened violently, sweat breaking across my skin despite the cold, and I stepped back slowly, careful not to make a sound, when a sudden sharp creak from the ceiling above made my breath hitch hard in my throat. I tilted my head, back slowly, ears straining, and heard it again. Footsteps, faint but deliberate, moving across the attic floor, slow and heavy, like someone pacing. One step, pause. Another step. I backed into the hallway, knife raised, scanning the ceiling where faint dust drifted down from the beams, and whispered to myself, "There's no attic." But the steps kept moving, deliberate and steady, until they stopped directly above me. My chest tightened as I held my breath, frozen in place, when suddenly the old rotary phone on the wall rang loudly, shattering the silence, making me jump violently, clutching my chest. My hand trembled as I reached for the receiver, remembering Grady's warning. Don't answer after midnight no matter what. The clock read 12:47 a.m. I hesitated, forcing myself to pull my hand away, letting it ring, but the ringing stopped abruptly after the third chime, replaced by something far worse. A single loud knock on the front door. My heart stopped instantly, ears ringing in the sudden silence, and after a long pause, 3 more knocks came, slow, deliberate, each one heavier than the last, vibrating faintly through the wooden frame. I forced myself to step backward into the shadows, knife clutched tight, as a soft voice drifted through the door, muffled but clear. "Ethan, open the door." My breath caught instantly, my throat dry, because the voice sounded exactly like Grady. I pressed myself against the wall, silent, frozen, my mind screaming that it couldn't be him. I'd watched his truck drive away hours ago, back toward town. Then the voice came again, louder this time, harsher. "Ethan, open the door right now." My grip on the knife tightened until my hand ached, but I didn't move, forcing myself to stay silent until the voice dropped lower, deeper, twisting unnaturally like something tearing through static. "Ethan, lead me in." I clamped, my hand over my mouth to keep from making a sound, stepping back into the hallway shadows when the knock stopped completely, replaced by a faint dragging sound against the siding, soft and slow, like fingertips scraping along the wooden planks, circling the house deliberately, pausing at each window. I crouched low, peeking through the living room blinds, and the fog outside looked thicker now, the porch light barely cutting through it. But then I saw it. A figure standing just at the edge of the light, tall and thin, shoulders jerking, slightly like a puppet hanging loosely by invisible strings, its head bent sharply forward, face obscured by the shadows. I held my breath as it tilted its head up unnaturally far, revealing 2 faintly glowing eyes, black and wet, fixed on the house. And I ducked below the window instantly, choking back a sound, pressing my hand hard over my mouth. The air in the farmhouse felt heavier, thicker, my lungs working against the weight of it as I crouched lower, knife trembling in my hand, when something slammed against the back door suddenly, hard enough to rattle the frame and send a glass of water shattering. On the counter, I spun around, breathing ragged, heart hammering violently as I backed into the hallway. And that's when I heard a faint whisper sliding through the air vents, soft, calm, and unmistakably my own voice. "Don't look outside." My legs nearly gave out, knees buckling as my grip on the knife loosened, and I stumbled into the kitchen, chest heaving, staring at the vent cover vibrating faintly as the whispering stopped abruptly. Silence pressed back into the house again, too heavy, too absolute, when somewhere out in the fields, close enough to carry through the fog, came a low, deep humming, soft at first but rising slowly, vibrating through the floor beneath my boots, rattling the glass in the windows, and I backed toward the center of the room instinctively, eyes darting toward the porch door as the humming grew louder, layered now, dozens of tones interwoven, too structured to be random, almost melodic, And then, just as I thought it couldn't get louder, it stopped instantly. I stood frozen, straining to hear. Every nerve in my body lit up. When the living room blinds shifted slightly, a faint shadow sliding across the window frame, slow, deliberate, like someone standing inches from the glass was moving along the wall. I stepped back into the hallway, forcing my breath to stay quiet, when from somewhere deep inside the fog, carried so faintly I almost thought I imagined it, came a single whisper, soft but sharp. My name. Ethan.